The most dangerous housing markets aren't crashing, they're transitioning. Denver's housing market feels calm right now, but that calm is actually what makes 2026 risky. Activity is returning beneath the surface, and most buyers and sellers aren't prepared for what that actually means. Today, I'm breaking down why the coming surge will confuse people, expose bad assumptions, and reward only those who understand how activity really comes back. I'm Landon, a local Denver realtor, and I track market behavior week by week so my clients don't make decisions based on headlines or gut reactions. Before we talk about prices and predictions, we need to talk about what a surge actually looks like in a transitional market. So when most people hear surge, most people think there's just going to be this runaway pricing that we've experienced in the past. That's not necessarily what we're talking about, right? There could be a surge in 2026 that just starts basically creating more activity, right? More people transitioning or more people moving in the marketplace. That doesn't necessarily mean price increases. Typically, price increases when demand outweighs supply, and we've seen that in years past, from 2012 all the way up to 2021, 2020, the early part of 2022, we saw huge surges in price. This form of a surge, it really, you don't have to have low interest rates for this to happen, but our volume of transactions has been down for so many years now since 2022. With 3 years of lower volume, we're expecting to see people return back to moving. And whether that means a lateral move, whether it means downsizing, whether it means they're not doing the greatest when they sell, but doing better when they buy. So typically for buyers and sellers to take action in the market, it doesn't necessarily require low interest rates. It requires clarity. You need to understand the direction that the market's headed and the right strategy to go about in the current market. So buyer intent tends to return before confidence does. And buyers start to have that desire to buy a house, before they feel really comfortable with the market in a lot of cases. And so right now there's a lot of intent out there, and people are starting to take action. This has been one of the busiest starts to the year I've ever had as far as people reaching out and wanting to get going. So it feels like volume of transactions is going to go up this year in 2026. And the numbers and economist predictions definitely support that. Transitional markets sit between fear and optimism, which creates misreads sometimes. Really, in this market as well, you have to realize that mistakes accelerate when people assume that conditions are going to be easier than they really are. That's when sellers overprice their homes a lot of times, when they think that it's just going to be easy to sell, right? Rather than taking the proper preparation. And oftentimes on the buy side too, buyers can assume the opposite, that they're just going to get every deal possible, right? When sellers are holding on to their prices, and they need a good strategy to be able to negotiate and get prices down. When people hear the word surge, they immediately think prices going up, bidding wars, and everything getting easier again. And that's where the lie starts. Activity does not mean affordability. Movement does not mean leverage. Calm markets create patience, but transitional markets create mistakes. What actually happens is people start making decisions based on how the market feels, not how it's functioning. And they assume that motion equals safety. And that assumption is what gets people stuck overpaying, mispricing, or hesitating at the exact wrong moment. And 2026 is shaping up to be exactly that kind of a market. So if this isn't going to feel like a boom, what will it actually look like on the ground? So the question is, if this isn't going to feel like a pricing boom, what's it actually going to look like on ground level? So one question is it going to feel like 2021 again? And I think the answer is no. There's a lot of things that are different about this market than what we had in 2021. First of all, inventory started the year out at about 7,000 homes. Yes, 7,000, not 9,000 like I said on my last video. We dropped a couple thousand homes just in the 2 weeks over the holidays. And so a lot of those listings will come back and relist after the holidays, but we're starting at an inventory level that's more normal. 1,200 homes is what we had in 2021 in the springtime in the entire market, and that was an absolute feeding frenzy. So it's not going to be that same type of market. We were also dealing with interest rates in the 2.5% range back then, where interest rates to start the year this year are right around 6.15%. So it's a different feel, and obviously you've got a lot more affordability challenges right now than you had before. And to sellers, they may be wondering, why is my home sitting when other homes are selling quickly? I just sat down with a seller yesterday who had gone through an expiration on their listing contract, and they had mentioned that 2 of the homes in their neighborhood sold while they were on the market, and they sold quickly, and theirs didn't. Theirs sat for 4 or 5 months and didn't sell. And so, it was a great opportunity for me to help them prep their home a little differently this time and help them strategize so that we can nail it this time around. It's going to be a different scenario for those sellers that think it's easy, that don't prep their home properly. Those are the ones that are going to sit for a while, and also they think it's still pandemic pricing where everybody's just going to pay an exorbitant amount for their home. I was looking back at comps in 2021 for a property that we're trying to, there's just not very many comps for this property that we're evaluating. fluctuating. And so we had to go all the way back to that time frame to look at what else has sold with that floor plan. And looking back on 2021, it was like every property I was looking at was $40,000 to $60,000 over asking price back then. It was just the environment that we were in back then because of all those factors I just mentioned. I don't think we're going to see that. And sellers that think that that's the mindset and that's where they're price their home, just kind of carelessly because they think everyone's just going to come and run and offer for it, sorely mistaken. And so those are the types of things that I think could bite people in 2026. And then you may wonder, like, why does the market feel on ground level? Why does it feel unsettled instead of exciting? And I think a lot of that excitement is wrapped up with people being a little bit strapped financially. You've got a real affordability issue for a lot of people. And there are some that have done extremely well during this time frame and, their business is taken off or, they're in an industry that's really been positive. And so they still have the money to buy and have a lifestyle that they want. You have others that are just getting by, right? And so they're having to choose between lifestyle and their house situation. And that's unsettling, to me when I hear about those types of situations. And so that's why I think it's just a little more unsettled than exciting and just like, full steam ahead for a lot of people is because they're dealing with that financial pressure alongside of having the goal and having that desire to want to, get into a home and be a homeowner. So you have to understand that there's seasonality to the market and that activity returns in bursts, not waves. And so it will see a big spike in activity, especially from February to April timeframe. That's where most people get into the market. And that's why we drive so much traffic during that time. And 3/4 of our annual appreciation happens in our market during those 3 months. And so that's a big burst of activity. We'll have another burst of activity that happens in the early fall. September, October tends to be a very good time. We'll have a burst of new listings that comes on. Typically April, May, June timeframe is when we'll see the most inventory come on the market and peak at about the 4th of July before it starts to go down at that point. Things about the patterns of the market that are good to know here in the Denver area. And, typically the best time to sell is between February and April. And typically the best time to buy is July, August, or November, December in our market. Absolutely. You can have success any time of year on both sides. But, if you're trying to time it just right, that's a good way to think about it. If you're doing both, if you're selling and buying, then oftentimes it doesn't really matter as much. Your experience is going to be different, but it doesn't matter as much as far as your net outcome because you're going to win a little on one side and lose a little on the other, depending on the time of year that you decide to go and make a move happen. Also, you have to understand that most buyers and sellers interpret movement emotionally and not strategically. Okay. If you've ever sold your own house, you know how emotional this process is. I've done it a couple times and I couldn't believe how emotional I got. It was the best training I've ever had because I got to feel what sellers feel when they sell their house. And when you're buying a house, it can be incredibly emotional too. And I remember when I offered on my first home, I was kind of mad about, seller that didn't get back to us in time. And I was like, man, I'm just going to change my offer and go a little higher so that we hear back from them. And I remember my dad, my mentor, coached me through that. And he was just like, just have some poise, just wait, give it a night, let them think about their decision on their counter. And then, the next day we got back to him and ended up not coming together. But I felt so much better because I had some poise and some patience through the process. And I didn't just let myself get emotional in the negotiations. But it's easy to do. Buyers and sellers tend to do that more often than not. And strategy kind of goes out the window when emotions take over. And that's definitely another thing that's affecting the market right now. This isn't going to feel like 2021. It's going to feel uneven. One home sells in 3 days and another one sits for 60 to 90 days. One weekend feels competitive, the next feels dead with no showings. People will say that the market is hot and slow in the same sentence, and both may be technically true. That confusion isn't random. It's what transitional markets do. And the gap between activity and confidence is where people misread what's actually happening. And that confusion leads directly to the biggest buyer mistake I see when activity returns. So when buyers see activity pick up and they see that there's a couple bidding wars going on, right, it kind of spreads some fear, right, throughout them and other buyers that talk together. And it tends to be when buyers start to just write very senseless offers that don't make any sense just to get a house when you've got 10 others sitting right here open and vacant without any offers on them. And so the key is don't rush in so fast that you lose your mind and you end up spending way more than you should on a house or getting the wrong house that you don't really want just because somebody else wants it. So I think that's where buyers can make some mistakes sometimes. There's a lot of competition that usually stacks up on these flipped properties, right? That are completely gorgeous on the inside, absolutely turnkey, you don't need any work. And so be careful with that as well, because a little bit of sweat equity can go a long way if you're willing to do a couple little projects here and there, especially carpet, paint, appliances. Some of those things are the things that come back to you threefold and can make a lot of money that way rather than getting so set on that same house that 10 other people are set on. So the leverage that comes in the market is really just preparation and strategy, right? If I'm a seller that's really prepared and I've done all the things that make sense to do on my house, before I list it, that create emotional appeal, then oftentimes I've created leverage for myself, and I may have 2, 3, 4 buyers that want to buy my house. I think the same thing happens on the buy side. When you're very smart and strategic and you're not just enamored by all the upgrades, but you buy a house that has great bones in a great area, and then you put a little work into it after closing, oftentimes those buyers create leverage for themselves because they may find a home that fits that description, but it's been on the market for 30, 40, 50 days, and now they have the opportunity to get a great deal on that house. I just saw one go away in my community that was listed at $890,000, dropped all the way to $810,000, and somebody just picked it up in the high sevens, and that house is a $900,000 house that someone just got for $780,000, and it was because they were set on, I'm just gonna buy the right house in the right neighborhood that has great bones. It had 4 bedrooms up, it had a great floor plan, some quirks to the cosmetics for sure, but they can put a little bit of money into that and have a great home for $50,000 to $70,000 under market value. But there's a lot of people out there that are just waiting for certainty or waiting for the sure thing, and that can really backfire because the longer you wait and just expect property values to come down 15, 20, 25%, oftentimes in our market, look at the history. You can look back at the Great Recession, and during that time we lost anywhere from 8 to 20% in our market, and depending on what floor plan and what location you were around the Denver metro area, again, that was a lot better than some of these other areas that lost 70% of their home value. But that's the most drastic impact we've ever had on our pricing in our market. And you look at every other recession in the Denver history, and typically a recession in Denver means 2 to 3% growth. And it doesn't mean prices tanking. It typically means a lot less transaction volume, less people moving, and very gradual growth patterns. So if you're waiting for certainty, even 2 to 3% per year, which we've experienced over the last couple of years, that's still based on our average price. That's $15,000 a year that you've become more and more behind on affordability. If your income's not growing and your savings isn't growing. So I think that the key is being calculated, making sure that you can afford what you're buying, but also not being so hesitant and lacking decision-making ability that you wait too long and then you're completely priced out of the market. When activity picks up, buyers don't rush the best deals. They rush certainty. They pile into homes that feel clean, easy, and familiar. That's where competition stacks up. Meanwhile, leverage usually exists in the homes people feel unsure about or feel a little uncomfortable. The listings with questions, the ones that need strategy, the ones that don't photograph perfectly but price realistically. If you're thinking about buying and this part is making you pause, that's a good thing. Don't skip this. And if this breakdown is helpful, make sure that you like and subscribe to my channel. I post these so that you can actually understand what's happening in the market. And if you want help navigating this market without guessing or reacting to headlines, that's exactly what I help people do. Buyers aren't the only ones who misread this phase. Sellers make their own costly assumptions too. So one big trend I think is a seller mistake lately, over the course of 2025, we definitely saw this a lot, was that showings don't necessarily mean that demand is back. And there's a lot of showings that are happening right now and a lot of people that just don't pull the trigger on homes. And I think that when there's true demand, buyers are actually pulling the trigger and moving forward on homes, not just out looking. I think that a 6% interest rate or, if rates dip into the high fives, I think that's more the norm for people right now. And their heads have gotten used to that rather than thinking that, the normal rate is in the 2s and 3s. I think now people understand how much of a premium that was back then. And when I think about, which homes really struggle the most to sell, I think it's really the sellers that just get the least amount of advice, where they just assume that it's going to be easy, that they know it all, and that they can just put it on the market and something good's going to happen. And, if you're one of those people, you may have a great habits of home ownership and just be checking all the boxes that buyers care about, but chances are you're missing some things. You've got some blind spots that, it'll really help to do a home consultation, a walkthrough, and something I'm more than happy to do. Also, I think the ones that struggle really don't listen to feedback. They see the feedback, but they're really prideful about their house and their situation, and they don't listen to it early, and then it ends up costing them later with market timing, which is your worst enemy when you're a seller. Once you get driven up to that 60 plus days on market, everyone starts to think, what's wrong with this place? Why isn't this place sold? There must be some structural thing wrong. There must be spiders in the closet, or there must be, moisture issues with this place. And once people start thinking along those lines, they're really looking when they walk through of what's wrong with this house. And that's not what you want your focus to be if you're trying to get a good offer on your home. And all that urgency and excitement is at the beginning beginning of the listing. So the faster you can listen to feedback and get to the right price or get to the right condition, the less time it's going to take you to sell and the more money you're going to get when it does sell. And again, there's more pricing errors that happen when you have false confidence, when you think your home is worth more than it is. And so those types of homeowners that price their home too high, they're punished even faster in moving markets where there's a lot of showings going on. And they'll be like that situation that I mentioned before, where you're seeing all these other homes sell in your neighborhood and you're the one that's still sitting there because you priced your home too high based on the condition that it has. Another trend that I'm seeing is sellers make the mistake of, hey, we're clean, we're okay, it'll sell. And clean is good, simple is good, but it doesn't get people emotional. And you've underestimated the emotional aspect of the sale. And so when there's nothing to really get excited about on a home, those types of homes struggle the most. And I've seen very clean homes that don't have anything wrong with them, that are absolutely great, but they just don't win the beauty contest. They don't get buyers excited because the cosmetics are just dull. Even though the house is clean, those homes just sit in our market right now. And oftentimes they're just priced too high for the condition. And buyers are walking through those types of homes and they're thinking, I got to put $10,000 into this. I got to put $30,000 into that. I got to put $40,000 into that primary bathroom remodel. I got to put, $50 into the kitchen. Basement's going to take me $100 and I only have $10,000, so that's the challenge. Is you got buyers that have limited funds, right? And so if they need to update all these things cosmetically that they want in the house, it's probably not going to happen. And guess what? Instead of offering lower, because it's not the price that's the biggest problem, it's their cash on hand that's the biggest problem for the price. And so instead of writing a low offer, they're just going to skip it and go to the next place because there's plenty of other homes out there right now. It's not like we're at a shortage like we were in 2021, 22 spring, where we had very few homes on the market. There's a lot to choose from. And when you have 7,000 homes in January, people are just going to pick another one and keep looking. And that's why you get lots of showings and not very many people pulling the trigger on offers, is because the sellers haven't met that equilibrium between condition and value. Also, the other mistake that a lot of sellers make is they think, we'll just get our feet wet in the first 2 weeks and then we'll see how it goes. The first 2 weeks tell the full story, you guys. The first 2 weeks is critical. From a marketing plan, we blitz those first 2 weeks, more often than not. And we're getting you on 80,000 different websites. We apply our Zillow showcase listing credit, homes.com pro package. All of that marketing goes out. We do 2 3D tours. We've got, an incredible Remax team that all my staff does is syndicate the listing on over 80,000 different websites. And then we do an open house on weekend 2. So we've got a plan on weekend 1 and weekend 2 to make sure that we're doing everything possible to sell your home, including calling your neighbors and asking them, would you like to choose your neighbor? We've got a listing where you could choose your neighbor and live by someone that you know. So those are all things that we do in our marketing plan in the first couple weeks, because we understand the urgency of those first couple weeks on the market. That will tell the story on whether your home will sell or not. And after that, all that activity, if it's still not sold, that means it's probably a little bit on the high side, and it could be 1% that can make all the difference. Then you could get a contract after that. Sellers see activity return and assume demand is back, but movement doesn't hide mistakes. It exposes them. Average homes struggle the most in this phase. Pricing errors get punished quickly, and the first 2 weeks tell you everything you need to know about a property. Hope is not a strategy when the market starts moving again. So how do you prepare for this kind of market without trying to predict it? So when you ask yourself, how should I prepare? If I'm a buyer, how should I prepare to buy a house? Well, first of all, you're here, you're listening to this, you're getting educated on what to do and how to create strategy, how to understand the Denver metro area if this is your area of focus. Those are all great things to do before you hit the ground and start getting into homes and looking inside of places. You should also really have frank conversations. If you're a couple buying together, have really honest conversations about what's important to each of you and see if that lines up. If it doesn't line up, then talk through compromises possibly, or what would be the best scenario for the two of you, or for your whole family. If it's kids involved as well. What is the most important thing about location, about floor plan, about number of bedroom, bathrooms, about a community, the amenities that you experience, what you're close to, what you frequent, what you want to be walkable. All of that stuff really matters. So if you can have the most part of that figured out before you start meeting up with an agent, then you'll be way ahead of the game. The other thing is, have your pre-approval done with a lender and make sure that you know all the ins and outs of what this price and this payment looks like. So equating price to payment on different types of properties out there and doing a couple test runs with a lender and just say, hey, here's a house I'm interested in. What do you think this payment would look like for me if we got it at this price and we had this much in concessions, meaning seller paid closing costs that are paying for you to buy down your interest rate or pay your closing costs altogether. So those are the types of questions I would be asking a lender to make sure that you're financially prepared to buy a house. What's the best time to sell? And yes, you've heard me me say over and over again, February to April tends to be the best time in our market. And that's why you get so many agents that give advice of wait till after the Super Bowl to list your house, and there's some truth to that. I would say 2026 has been one of the most active first weeks of January I have ever experienced in my career in 18 years. I've got people reaching out quite a bit right now, and it's been great to see that activity start strong. A lot of sellers and homeowners that get on before the Super Bowl will get some buyers, that may be washed up by other listings afterwards because of the competition. And so I think starting sooner is a great idea if you're a seller. And other than timing, what should you be doing? Well, first thing you should do if you're a seller is have me over. I would prefer for it to be me, but have a listing agent that has experience in your area selling, who can give you a really good walkthrough and talk with you and coach you through each room of your house, what you should do to prepare it for sale. That's usually the most valuable thing you can do. And so this time of year, contractors are more readily available. Come springtime, I had an HVAC guy tell me, like, if you call me in April, I'll get back to you in June. But if you call me now, I'll get back to you this afternoon. So it's just, there are certain contractors that are, way less busy in January than they are later on in the year. And so that's important to have as well. Also, you should get a market analysis done on your house so you know exactly what your home will sell for. Well, you're never gonna know exactly, but a good range, right, for what it would sell for, and you can plan around things financially because you probably have a next step that you're taking. Maybe some of you are thinking about selling and renting for a while, but most people are thinking about selling and getting into another type of property. And there's a lot of people, if you're in the boat of those who have had pent up demand and needs for the last 4 years, but haven't wanted to leave your low interest rate for the fear of missing out, right? That FOMO that comes from that, then understand that you haven't missed out. You've been paying a very low rate of interest for all the time that you've owned that loan. And because of that, you've paid down way more principal than you would have. And so you haven't completely missed out if you sell and move away from that rate. You've gained a lot in equity, right? And so that's real money that will come back to you. And I think that that's another way of thinking about it, instead of just thinking like, I'm going to lose all this. If you have a need that needs to be met, then you got to make a move. And now is a great time to do that, I believe. Also, a lot of people go on predictions from economists and what's going to happen in the market and make their decisions based on that. And I'll just tell you, economists are right half the time and they are wrong the other half. I promise you that. So I used to take it to the bank, everything economists said, and you just can't do that. They're humans. They have a human error rate of 50%. And so, take it with a grain of salt, but also think about what makes common sense. Think about what experts are saying. You don't need a prediction to win in this market. Buyers need to prepare financially, not emotionally. Sellers need to price for today's buyer, not yesterday's market. Timing matters less than execution. Positioning matters more than optimism. And understanding where leverage actually shows up beats guessing where prices might go. Clarity beats confidence every single time. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, don't forget to follow or subscribe. I break down what the Denver market is actually doing, not just what the headlines say. And if you're planning to buy or sell in Denver over the next couple of years, understanding this now puts you ahead of most people. So reach out before you make a decision based on assumptions. I'll help you read the market clearly instead of emotionally. Also, if you're thinking about buying in Denver anytime soon, you need to watch this video where I break down what buyers are getting wrong right now and why timing without strategy is costing people money. I'll see you there.